with 2 children who, after fleeing an abusive relationship, finds herself with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. She spends her days worrying about finding a place that's safe for her and her children to stay the night, how she's going to feed them. She's worried about just simply rebuilding her life after dealing with so much trauma. And this here is an example of what many people in America are going through. And when they can tap into transitional housing, it provides a beacon of hope for these individuals in dire situations. And it's more than just a roof over their heads. It's a lifeline that's offering stability and support in a path to self-sufficiency. So by understanding what transitional housing is, how it functions, why it's vital, these are critical points that you need to understand in order to prepare for individuals such as this. So in this particular episode, we're going to talk about what transitional housing is, what it isn't, how HUD defines it, my personal definition of what transitional housing is, and then really why it matters. And then at the back end, we'll talk more about what you can do to make a difference. But let's first talk about what transitional housing is. And the way I like to look at transitional housing, it is simply a temporary living situation that's not just giving them housing, but it's targeting a specific type of individual, whether you're working with individuals who might be dealing with abuse, fleeing a bad situation, or you're dealing with veterans who find themselves homeless, or you're dealing with people who are coming out of incarceration. Those are the type of people that we cater to, and providing them specific services to help them be able to get out of the situation that they're in. So through transitional housing, we're able to offer them those services and give them some sense of stability. And it is not permanent housing. I don't even define it as some people like to say supportive permanent housing. It's simply meant to be temporary, but you're giving them services to help them be successful. We wrap services with that, whether we're dealing with, case management services and offering solutions to help them dealing with what they were dealing with in their particular situation. And then as you do that, you build a plan to be able to help them be successful so that they can move from that temporary situation into something that is more permanent and sustainable. And that is the main goal of what transitional housing is. So I don't look at it as just shelter. Many people like to sometimes define it as emergency shelter. This is not that. Unlike an emergency shelter situation, we provide that short-term immediate shelter that is needed. So that's how we like to look at it. And sometimes you could get individuals who are just looking for a moment of housing for about a month. But most of the time you're dealing with something that is less than 24 months, but definitely a short period of time. So it's not just shelter that you're providing them. And the goal is to just give them the resources that they need so that they can be successful. And as I said before, it's not meant to be permanent. It's meant to be a situation where you are transitioning from one situation, getting the skills that you need, and then giving you into something that's permanent. But I will tell you, in the housing that we provide, sometimes they do stay longer, and it is deemed somewhat more of a supportive, permanent housing situation that you're creating. But the goal of transitional housing is that it is not meant to be permanent. Now, many people I find like to compare it to a boarding house. Transitional housing is not a boarding house, and many people do confuse it with a boarding house. But what a boarding house provides is more of long-term lodging for individuals with no services, no wraparound services whatsoever. There's no type of support that you're offering them. You're simply just providing housing. Now, as you're looking at if you're looking at a boarding house situation, there's a lot of restrictions involved in just simply creating a rooming house or a boarding house. If you're just providing housing, depending on what situation you're in, you could be in a particular municipality or location where they put restrictions on that. I know here in St. Louis, if you are not related, you cannot have more than 3 people in a house that are not related unless you go through a different process for getting that property deemed as suitable for that type of shared housing. So once again, you have to know your area, but transitional housing is not designed to be a boarding house. And typically, as I said, they do not come with services. So that's basically what transitional housing is and what it isn't. Now, as you look at HUD's definition, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm not an expert in HUD. I've been around a long time. I do know that sometimes the definition that HUD has changes over time, and the amount of funding that they make available to transitional housing does change from time to time. But the way in which HUD looks at the definition of transitional housing, and when I say HUD, that is Department of Housing and Urban Development. So when you look at their definition of what transitional housing is, it is a program that is designed to provide housing and supportive services for up to 24 months. So depending on where you're located, or depending on, because everyone has different, I know it's changed over time. I've never gone after any transitional housing funding, but I do know, I hear that is coming down the pike, because we are getting ready to hit an epidemic as it relates to housing. But they are clearly shifting even some of those definitions now. But that is how they define what transitional housing is. And what their goal is to be able to help facilitate individuals who are considered homeless into more of a permanent housing model. So their definition of transitional housing, clearly moving people from homelessness into permanent housing, there's that gap that transitional housing provides, and that's how they like to define it. Now, they additionally like to say that, like I said, 24 months typically. I've heard of like the rapid rehousing dollars we've been able to use in the past, and I believe they are still available today, so that you can be able to provide that gap funding for up to 24 months. But that's what determines whether they've defined it as transitional, if it is up to 24 months. And they also may have some other guidelines. Like I do know, depending on the shared housing model, sometimes they don't always support the shared housing model for that. But I have also seen that they've been able to do that, just depending on how those contracts or those relationships with those agencies are able to write that contract with the housing. So you want to be very detailed in getting that information to see if there is any funding available that according to how HUD defines it. But when I think about transitional housing, just my personal definition of transitional housing, that's that compassionate side. That's why I always talk about the properties that I work in provide some type of service to individuals who live there. It's not just a place where you come and sleep and lay your head and you just have shelter. We provide levels of structured support to individuals. So my personal definition, that to me is what transitional housing is a compassionate, structured support system that provides individuals and families with not only a place to live, but also the tools and resources necessary for them to be able to rebuild their lives. That is my core. That is what I'm built on. That is what I give out. And by creating that bridge for individuals, you're able to help them move between crisis and stability. You're able to get them to understand from a holistic approach what their immediate needs are and what their long-term goals are. That's why I love transitional housing. To be able to offer that and do more than just simply do housing is like 10 times the reward to me when you're able to take an individual from a point to where they were to where they are going. It's priceless. And as I think about also that path for individuals from either homelessness or a very difficult situation into something that's more permanent. Sometimes there's levels to that as well. The goal is just simply that you're providing some level of support to them, to getting them to be more stable than they were. And as long as we can reach what that stability looks like for individuals, that's a win to me. Doesn't necessarily mean they have to complete XYZ according to what I say. It's what they want, because it's not about me. It's not about even you, what you might want for individuals. It's what they want and what they need. So when you can move individuals from a situation that is critical for them and it's a dire situation, and you move them into something that's a little more stable, that is, and it's what they want, that is the best result. I also want to add a note, because I know so many people who, especially when you're working with people who are unhoused, they've been unhoused for decades, not just like a few months. We're talking about long-term chronic homelessness. It's different for their experience. So being able to come in a space when you're working with individuals and helping them transition, you always have to remember it's about what they want, not what you want for them. Perfect example, I remember when we were working in a shelter and we were so excited we had gotten someone into their own apartment. They hadn't had an apartment for a while. And this was my first early on in understanding and working with this population. And we were so excited. We got them into an apartment, got them furniture. We laid everything out beautiful for them. Even got them funding so they didn't have to worry about paying for that result. And it wasn't even, I don't even think it was 60 days. They were back out unhoused again. And it makes you think about the situation. We really took them from a situation where they had their stability. Even though it might not fit our paradigm of what they should have for housing, that was their housing. And that was their community that they created. So in essence, you sometimes inadvertently can cause trauma in a situation with an individual because you're trying to impose what you want for them onto their lives when it isn't about you. It's about them. So I think about that. I'm reminded of that all the time. And that happened years ago in my first early on in working in this space, wanting to be of help. I recognized that my definition of success for them didn't necessarily fit the definition for them. So you want to be very careful when you're working in this space. But that is just sort of how I define what is important and what my definition is of transitional housing and how we can apply that going forward. And I think also the one thing I'll add here as well is the fact that as individuals are moving into this space, we really want to focus on providing a holistic approach, not just one dynamic. You have to look at individuals in every aspect to be able to provide a whole picture support if you can, and based on what they want, not based off of what you want. So we're going to close this out on why it matters. But before we get into why it matters, please be sure to subscribe to this channel and be able to click the notifications, because we have more to come on this topic of transitional housing. And I don't want you to miss the opportunity to be able to get into a space that you really are developing a passion for. And I'm going to impart some amazing knowledge for you during that. So as we look at why it even matters, at the end of the day, we know we are dealing with a pandemic on our hands. It is going to become extremely dire as we look at affordable housing options, because more and more individuals are finding themselves without housing. People who you would define as typically not being a part of the unhoused population are going to be, just simply because there is no affordable housing. They're going to have to get creative around what we do to help support our population, as it's growing, as you're seeing seniors who are now coming into the space they call now the silver tsunami. You're going to have seniors coming in who don't have housing. You're going to have more and more people who are losing their jobs, finding themselves without housing. You're finding more and more people coming out of incarceration as they release individuals and re-enter them into society with home plans that are not successful. The need for not only affordable housing, but transitional housing is critical. So as we are faced with that lack of affordable housing is really going to put us in a position and at a disadvantage if we are not creative with the solutions that we provide to tackling this pandemic that we're dealing with. So being able to tackle that allows for us to be able to create the security and stability that is needed for these individuals who are vulnerable. If we do not put things in place to deal with that, we're going to have a major issue on our hands. You're dealing with people who are dealing with trauma, wanting to recover from trauma, the trauma that they've experienced being homeless, and being able to provide them the stability that they deserve to have. Everybody deserves to have a home. Everybody deserves to have a place to lay their heads and not be threatened to be incarcerated because they live on the streets, which is just blows my mind that people are putting legislation in place that is criminalizing individuals for being unhoused. So these are the things that we're facing, and if we do not put together a solution toward helping individuals who are in this space, we are going to feel the impacts of that. Even in your home, as you sit there, you're going to feel the impacts of homelessness when you walk outside, when you go to the store, when you go to the gas station. You see it now every day. You're seeing the impact. So imagine as the affordable housing diminishes, as individuals who are finding themselves unhoused, as you find seniors who are finding themselves in a position where they are also homeless, you're going to see more and more people that are going to be out there on the streets, and you're going to see them out there living. And that you will see even in your cozy little home where you live. So these are the realities that we currently face. We are impacted as a community. So if we're not putting the right solutions in place to addressing this matter, then we are going to feel the effects of that. So as we move into the next level of how you can make a difference, I'll be sharing that next so that you can understand the impacts you can make toward helping individuals be able to get out of these dire situations, even fleeing for your life because you're being in an abused relationship. We can be able to help individuals like that be able to make a difference and get into a space where they are stable and they are supported and they are sustained. And this is Tony Wade, the Compassionate Investor. Be sure to look at that next episode.